Hello, my friends. Welcome to my corner. When I was in college, I took a theology course on revelation and the knowledge of God. The course was taught by a priest who is now one of my best friends, even though there is quite a bit of a difference in age between us and we live in different countries. Someday I hope to share more with you of the reading list for that course because it was a truly mind-blowing reading list. But the book that we are going to focus on today is The Cloud of Unknowing. When I took the course, we read this edition right here. It's published by Image, and the translation is by William Johnston. Now, if you want to get this translation, which by the way is very good today, it probably doesn't look like that right now. It's gonna look more like this. Jorge, why do you have two copies of the same edition? My mother just happened to buy this about a month ago. I think she's planning to give it to somebody, so I was like, I'll feature it in the video since we can do that, right? Now, this time, when I reread The Cloud of Unknowing, I decided to go with the Penguin edition, and that is the one that we are going to focus on because I am a Penguin fan, and I thought, well, sometimes when I reread something, I would rather reread a different translation. This translation is by A.C. Spearing, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what is included in this book today. So let's look at it, shall we? So let's talk first about the contents, okay? Most of the time, you're going to notice that The Cloud of Unknowing is paired with another book titled The Book of Privy Counseling. That is true of this Penguin edition, and it is also true of the other editions that I showed you before. Now, the Penguin edition has another advantage, and that is that it adds two more texts that function kind of as an introduction, one of them, and kind of as a conclusion, the other one. And the titles of those other works are The Mystical Theology of St. Denis, that is the one that is kind of an introduction, and then at the conclusion, an Epistle on Prayer. These are very, very short works, and as I said, they kind of put in a frame The Cloud of Unknowing and the Book of Privy Counseling. All of these works have been attributed to the same author. He is thought to have been a priest and a Carthusian monk. So that is what we know about that author. And there's a great unity to all of these works. So for that reason, what I thought we would do is we would focus on the big one, which is The Cloud of Unknowing. So that's the way that we are going to approach this book. The key question here in all of these texts is whether we can know God. So it's a very, very big question. And it seems to me that this author's answer is yes and no. Okay, as usual, when we deal with spiritual things, this is a both and instead of an either or situation. So on the one hand, if you understand completely, it's probably not God, right? So that's one thing to consider on that hand. Now, on the other hand, if you look at it this way, if you cannot understand God at all, then what's the point, right? We could not really speak of revelation in the first place if that were the case. So God reveals himself to us, and we can get to know him to the extent that our intellect and our senses allow us to in this plane of existence. But this author, the author of The Cloud of Unknowing, is going to add another possibility, and that is the possibility of reaching knowledge of God through love. That is the main way to reach that knowledge, according to this author. So not through the intellect, not so much through the senses, right? And that makes perfect sense to me. So the lesson of this book is very clearly stated by this author. And you're going to find, if you look for this edition, the Penguin one, this is on page 48. And he says that whoever has God needs nothing else in this life. That is basically, in a nutshell, what he is trying to say in The Cloud of Unknowing. And the author begins by emphasizing humility and detachment from created things. So these are two things that we need if we are going to embark upon this journey that leads to the knowledge of God. The central image, the one that you have in the title right here, The Cloud of Unknowing, is a darkness that separates the human being from God, right? And the author says that as long as we are in this plane of existence, as long as we are in this life, that cloud, that darkness is never going to go away. That also makes sense to me. But if God is beyond our knowledge, if God is beyond what we can reach with the intellect and with the senses, we can definitely reach him through love. So that is the way, once again, that we should approach this journey. Very interesting thing about this book is that it talks actually about two clouds. Okay, so yes, one of them is the cloud of unknowing, but the other one is the cloud of forgetting. And the cloud of forgetting is a cloud that should separate the person who is meditating, the person who is praying, from worldly concerns, from created things. So in other words, if you want to visualize the central image of this book, think about a person suspended in the air with a cloud of unknowing above the person that separates that person from God, and the cloud of forgetting below that separates that meditating, praying person from created things, from worldly concerns, from worries, and all of those things. When it comes to prayer, this is one of the things that I like about this book in many ways. The author is very minimalistic. He says that contemplation should do its own work. Just let contemplation work by itself. He says, you are a block of wood. Let the carpenter work on it. Okay, so the carpenter just chips away everything in that block of wood that is not God. That is his approach. He says, just eliminate everything that is not God, and then let the work take care of itself. So in that sense, contemplation, one image that I was thinking about, is kind of just like opening a faucet, right? You don't bring the water from anywhere. The water is already there. All you're doing is just opening the faucet so that the water can pass and just do its work. So he says that during contemplation, we should think about God himself, quote unquote, in his naked being. That is what prayer is at the end of the day. He says we can focus on one word sometimes, a word like God, a word like love. And that's just one wonderful way to pray. Just like that. So as I said before, very, very minimalistic. We should not worry about the necessities of life, he says, because the idea here is that God will provide. And then one of the most difficult aspects of prayer is precisely the forgetting part, right? That cloud of forgetting, just leaving behind or leaving below created things, worldly concerns, worries, and all that. And I know anybody who has, engaged in meditation knows how difficult it is sometimes to let those worries, to leave them behind and not to let them worry us to the point that we cannot focus on the contemplation itself. He gives us also a definition of prayer that I really, really like, and you're going to find this on page 62. He says, prayer is nothing but a devout intention directed towards God for the attainment of good things and the removal of evils. That is his very simple but very commonsensical definition of prayer in this book. So that is exactly what he's talking about when he discusses mental prayer, contemplation, meditation. Any of those terms is adequate when we are talking about this issue at hand. One of the many things that I like about this book, I'm going to tell you, is the idea that the author is so conscious with the limitations of language. I would say he is almost obsessed with this because he keeps coming back to this idea. I thought of Wittgenstein, for example, saying the limits of my language are the limits of my world. So I want to read you a little passage from the initial text, the Mystical Theology of St. Denis, where he talks about this. So listen to this. This is on page number 7. He says, when we enter into the darkness that is beyond understanding, we shall find not only a growing lack of words, but as it were, a madness and the complete irrationality in all that we say. And a little below that, he says that in himself, he's talking about God, of course, he is above all speech and all understanding. So this is something that he keeps coming back to, as I was saying before. It's really a point of contact. This is one of the reasons why this particular aspect spoke to me, besides the fact that I am interested in language. It's really a point of contact with the work of Meister Eckhart. I told you about him before in one of the videos, actually the first video that I did on any kind of spiritual reading. And the author of The Cloud, this is a difference from Eckhart, is very conscious and very careful not to fall into what we could call deification, the idea of turning the person, the praying person, the contemplative person, into God. He doesn't really fall into that. Meister Eckhart seems to have been more, what word could I use here? more dramatic about this. He made it seem sometimes that the praying person becomes God, and he is criticized sometimes for that, though he looks at it in a very different way. I'm going to refer you to my video on Eckhart because I don't want to go on a tangent right here with that. But the author of The Cloud of Unknowing is very careful not to fall into that. He says that we may become one with God in grace, but in nature we are always going to be far, far below him. So that's the distinction that he makes in order not to fall into this idea that, oh yeah, you pray and you just become one with God. Not on this plane of existence, okay? Now that said, there are many, many Eckhartian moments, Eckhartian passages in this book. For example, his approach that there is not really much to do during contemplation, that contemplation is something that takes care of itself. That's why it's very difficult, if a person asks you, how do I pray? Of course, you can give them advice and you can give them some pointers, right? But at the end of the day, it's just very difficult because there is really not much to do when it comes to meditation. It's more receiving, it's more of being open and being receptive to God's grace. He also says, do not go anywhere. Do not go even within yourself during contemplation. Go nowhere. So that's another concept that reminded me of Eckhart. And it also reminded me of that thing that I shared with you, I think, in that other video of what a Buddhist told me once. He told me, you guys, Christians, pray the Lord's Prayer. And the Lord's Prayer says, let thy kingdom come, right? So it's not about going anywhere, but it comes to you. So that is another thing that you're going to find in The Cloud of Unknowing. That is also a little bit of a point of contact with Meister Eckhart. And also he tells us that God does not see us the way we are or the way we have been, but the way that we want to be. So there you have not only a point of contact with Eckhart, but I think also with Buddhism, right? That old idea in Buddhism that the only difference between the Buddha and us, ordinary human beings, is that the Buddha realized that he is a Buddha. We still kind of haven't fully come to the realization of that. And that is, according to a view of Buddhism, the only difference really. It's just a matter of realizing your true nature and then, of course, acting accordingly. And continuing with the Buddhist connection, I was remembering something that our professor told us back when I took this course many years ago. So my memory is not that bad, for some things at least. And I remember he told us that he had taught this course before, of course, and he had had a Buddhist student once. And this student said that the works that they had read in the course had not really spoken that much to him, but he had loved The Cloud of Unknowing. So you see, this is a book that is definitely Christian, but it really appeals to people who practice other faiths. It's a very open book in that sense, and especially to people who practice Buddhism or any kind of faith that really emphasizes and promotes meditation. I was looking also, a couple of days ago at an essay that I wrote for that course. I still have all of the essays that I wrote in college. And in the essay, what I was exploring was the fact that in The Cloud of Unknowing, it seems that the author emphasizes the divine nature of Christ, sometimes I would say to the detriment of the human nature of Christ. As you may know, Christians believe that Christ is both fully divine and fully human. Okay, so that is something that I noticed that maybe the author is kind of leaning more towards the idea of seeing Christ as divine than seeing him as human. And I was thinking, just asking myself, would maybe this be one of the reasons why this book is not that popular, not that famous among Christians than other books, right? It's just a question, So if you have read it, I would really love to hear your thoughts on that, what you think on that issue, because definitely, I have many friends who are Christians, and I don't really know anybody else besides those who were in that course with us who has read this book. This is an amazing book, and it definitely deserves more attention, not only among Christians, but I think from anybody, because it's a really, really deep exploration of what it means to pray, to meditate, etc. So the bottom line is that The Cloud of Unknowing is one of those books that really have enlightened me, and it has completely, changed my view of what it means to pray, to meditate, to be in a contemplative state. It is clearly a Christian text, but I think many people from different faiths, people who practice different faiths, will find a lot here in this book to inspire them when it comes to prayer and meditation. And I would say, if you like Meister Eckhart, or if you like Buddhism, I think definitely you should read this book, and I think you are going to love it. And aside from spiritual reading, for example, if you're interested in language, its scope, its limitations, how far can it go, especially when we are talking about things that transcend our senses and the experiences that we may have directly in this world, this book is going to provide much food for thought. So it's a book that I would recommend to anybody. It's a very brief text. The chapters in which the information is divided are very, very brief. So you can even use it for meditation. You just read a little chapter and then meditate on that. So it's a really useful book. It's an inspiring book. It's really easy to handle. So the bottom line really is that I recommend the Cloud of Unknowing to absolutely anybody. Do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? Just let me know. Those were my 2 cents on the Cloud of Unknowing. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.